And the little red thing is on and it's counting up, so I guess I must have successfully started. So a threshold stimulus, what it amounts to is whatever the stimulus is, it has now exceeded the threshold of excitation. The threshold of excitation. That means it's now going to cause a response. And this applies to pretty much any stimulus, not just a muscle. So even though we're talking specifically about a muscle, I want you to understand that a lot of these work together. We're teasing apart our systems, aren't we? We studied bones and the skeletal system. Now we're looking at the muscular system. But keep in mind, it all works together as one unit. Okay, so is everybody clear on that? Anybody here ever accidentally got an electric shock from something? You can feel your muscles immediately clench, don't they? You don't have any control over that. That's because that electrical stimulus is so strong, it basically overpowers the nerves. Your nervous system loses conscious control because it is basically locking it into the on position at full power. So does everybody understand that? We have exceeded the excitation, the threshold. If you have ever touched something very hot and jerked your hand away, have you exceeded the threshold with that? Yes. So it doesn't have to be conscious. Even though we're primarily talking about skeletal muscle here, I want you to understand that once the threshold is exceeded, the muscle will contract, period. Is everyone clear on that? It could be a conscious thought. I want to pick up my drink, so I extend my hand and I tighten the muscles in my fingers and hand. I tighten my biceps and I bring it to me. Everybody see that? That's deliberate thought and control, isn't it? But the key thing that I want you to understand, the response doesn't happen until you exceed the threshold. The response does not happen until you exceed the threshold. It does not matter what the stimulus is. You just have to exceed the threshold. Is everybody clear on that? And we talked about how the motor neuron, oh, and one other thing to understand, this is not instantaneous. It happens very, very quickly, what I like to call the speed of thought, but it is not an instant. Okay? There is a very slight delay. It's not something that you can measure just by looking. You have to have equipment to record it, because humans don't respond that fast. Normally, you'll have a single muscle fiber under the control of a single neuron. In other words, one neuron goes to one motor end plate on one muscle fiber. However, in some cases, you'll have a single neuron that synapses with the motor end plates of a group of muscle fibers. That is what we call a motor unit. A motor unit. A motor unit. Yeah, I know, scientists are so imaginative with their names. And what happens, they will contract as a single unit. They will contract as a single unit. Anybody here ever lifted weights, done pull-ups, that type of thing? Raise your hand if you have. Raise your hand. Okay, so most of us. And you know, after you've done a few of those pull-ups or reps, it gets progressively more difficult, doesn't it? You may even get halfway through it and just realize, I can't do this anymore. And you release the weights. The reason for that is because a sustained muscle contraction is never a complete contraction. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're holding something up, when I lift this, the muscles in my arm are contracting, right? But they don't just contract and hold. They will actually reset for an extremely short period and then contract again. The whole muscle as a unit never relaxes completely, so I don't lose my grip on the can. Does everybody see that? We call that summation, because the total force being exhibited is the summation of all of the muscle fibers contracting. Some of them can relax and contract again. The key thing is, not all of them will. The more you exert yourself, the more will go into a relaxation period, and that's when you hit the wall and you just can't lift it anymore. That relaxation period is called tetany. T-E-T-A-N-Y, tetany. And in humans, you only get partial tetany. The reason for that, like I said, you never get a complete relaxation of all of the muscle fibers, only part of them. The only way you can get complete tetany is in artificial conditions, like in the lab. Everybody with me? Okay. Has anybody here ever had a muscle spasm? It's not a twitching of the muscles, it is a clenching of the muscle, and it doesn't release. It's one of the most painful things I have ever had in my life. I hope you all never have to deal with it. I saw just about every hand go up. If anybody here ever had a muscle cramp, that's basically an example of what we call a spasm, S-P-A-S-M. A muscle spasm is a sustained involuntary contraction. And there are a lot of different things that can cause this. if you get, somebody here got leg cramps at night, ever had that? Or leg cramps when you're working out? Generally, that's caused by a lack of electrolytes, Potassium, magnesium, calcium. If you get a lot of cramps, they suggest you eat bananas. They're a good source of potassium. This is one of the reasons why, if you're a person who really works out hard, a hardcore athlete, when you drink something, they tell you not to drink water, right? They tell you to drink some kind of sports drink. That's because a lot of those replace the electrolytes that you lose through sweating. So you always want to make sure that you're getting enough electrolytes. And related to that is dehydration. If you remove a lot of the water, you're going to increase the concentration of salt, which is going to further give you an electrolyte imbalance, right? You can also have things like stress. Anybody here ever gotten a nice massage? Get those knots in your shoulders. Medical conditions, diabetes can cause that. Neuropathy, which is nerve damage. Anybody here ever pulled a muscle? I say again, a lot of people. Overuse. Generally, a muscle spasm is going to be painful, but it goes away fairly quickly. You can stretch the muscle to help make it relax. You can take a muscle relaxer. When I first started walking again, after all those months of essentially not walking, I used to get muscle spasms very, very bad. And they prescribed me muscle relaxers that were supposed to knock you out. I thought those things like candy, they didn't work. They ended up doing what is called TENS, T-E-N-S. Anybody ever here had that? Does anybody here know what it is? Crazy, isn't it? It stands for transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation. They literally strap electrodes to your body and crank up the juice. Did it work for you? It was one of the very few things that actually worked well for me with pain. To the point where I went out to Walgreens, bought myself a portable TENS unit. You want to have fun sometime? Have like 4 of those things strapped to your legs. Your wife walks in your leg and going, oh. And she reaches over to touch it and screams because there's so much juice going in. That disrupts the neurons. It disrupts the signal, so your muscles are no longer receiving it. It's actually a very effective method of it. You have to be careful though, you can only leave it on for so long. So, any questions on all of those disorders? You're not going to see a lot of long-term or permanent difficulties with the muscle response. The only one I can think of is tetanus. Tetanus is caused by Clostridium tetani, which is a bacterium. It's very often found in dirt. It's a soil bacteria. And generally, you won't get it unless you get a deep puncture wound. You're supposed to get one every 10 years, but generally you don't have to unless you get a deep puncture wound, in which case they recommend that you get it. Last time I got one, I had actually got a pencil lead stuck in my foot, and it broke off up in my foot, so they recommended it. That was a pretty interesting experience. I see several of you want to know how that happened, right? I was laying down on the couch, and my wife had left a pencil at the very end of it, and I stretched out, and it went right up in me, and it snapped and broke off. Are you laughing at me, Riley? Yes, you are. Y'all are wondering how it is I'm still alive. Well, it's a good thing I'm not a cat, because cats only get 9 lives. If I were a cat, I'd probably be working on my 2nd or 3rd set by now. It ended up being a pretty interesting experience, though, because Vanderbilt's a teaching hospital. So when I went over to the clinic, they sent me over to the surgery department, and one of the plastic surgeons was there. And he said, "I'm so glad you did this." I said, "Gee, thanks." He said, "Well, I didn't mean it like that. I was wanting to show this technique to my students. Can I bring them in?" "Sure." So I'm sitting there with my foot up, and there's this parade of about 20 students comes in. But he was wanting to show them surgical debridement, and he was really glad that it was a pencil lead, because that's very visible, isn't it? So every single one of them got to take a chance at digging in my wound. Don't worry, they did numb me up to scrape some of that out of there, and then when they had gotten all that they thought they could, he went in and got the rest of it, so I don't even have a scar that you can see. It's pretty crazy. Anyway, tetanus produces a toxin that interferes with the nervous system. And the old name for tetanus was lockjaw, because you would get some spasms in the muscles that control your jaw, and it literally would lock it. And if you get enough of that toxin, it will actually kill you. Anybody here ever heard of nerve gas? Chemical weapons? A lot of them also interfere with the muscular system. They block acetylcholine. If you block acetylcholine, can you clench your fist? Can't move at all, can you? It paralyzes the diaphragm. That means you can't breathe. Y'all are too young to remember any of the wars starting in Iraq, but my best friend almost got sent to the first one, and he got issued all the chemical weapons gear, and I was curious about what all they wore and everything, and he brought it over to my house and showed me, and he actually had a chemical warfare antidote kit. You rip it open, you pop cap off a syringe, and then you jab it directly through your pants, anything you got on over that or under that, your skin, and into your muscle, and press it. Because the nerve toxins are so extreme, if you don't hit it that quickly, you will die. And what they inject is atropine, which is basically a stimulant. And then you've got, I think he said, an hour to get the antidote to the antidote, because atropine itself is a toxin. Good times, right? So everybody understand how these things can work? Anybody here ever heard of a pufferfish? You ever heard of the Japanese dish fugu, F-U-G-U? Fugu is essentially sushi that is made from the pufferfish. The pufferfish contains something called tetrodotoxin. Tetrodotoxin is one of the nastiest toxins out there. Why? Because there's no antidote to it. And if you get the wrong part of the pufferfish in your fugu, you actually can ingest a lethal portion of tetrodotoxin. The only treatment that they can give you is essentially hook you up to a respirator and breathe for you. Fugu-related deaths are infrequent, typically numbering a handful of deaths per year, with a recent average of 0 to 6 per year. So people actually eat this stuff as a delicacy in Japan, and every year you literally have about a handful of people die from it. Pretty wild. Any questions? Okay, moving on. Recruitment of motor units. Basically, this is the nervous system deciding how many and what motor units are needed for a movement. Typically, the greater the stimulus, the greater of number of motor units involved. More stimulus means more motor units, means a stronger contraction. If the stimulus is strong enough, you will eventually recruit all of the motor units in the muscle. In a sustained contraction, you can generate about 50 pounds of pull for each square inch of muscle cross-section. For the big muscles like in the thighs, that can actually add up to several hundred pounds of force. Believe it or not, at one point in time, I was actually able to leg press and squat over 350 pounds. Yes, I actually was in shape once, back when I was your age. If you sustain that level of output for an extended period of time, the tendons will pull away from the muscle. Right, Baylor? When that happens, it's called a pulled muscle. A pulled muscle. You've actually pulled the tendons away from the muscle itself. And if you remember, we said you get brief periods of relaxation, right? Those periods of relaxation in summation are called muscle tone. Muscle tone. That means you basically have a continuous state of partial muscle relaxation. Partial muscle relaxation. Types of muscle contractions. You're going to have two classes. The first class is called isotonic. Isotonic. In an isotonic contraction, you're going to have an equal change in length. An equal change in length. If shortening occurs, it's called a concentric contraction. If you get lengthening, it's called an eccentric contraction. The second class are called isometric contractions. Isometric contractions are when the muscle moves against an immovable object. It's when the muscle moves against an immovable object. So example, I lift my drink, right? That's an eccentric contraction. Everybody see that? I set it down. That's a concentric. If I am pushing against the wall, that's an isometric contraction. And all of those, if you want to take a look at figure 9.17, that will diagram it. It's on page 316 in the hard copy, page 118 electronic. Types of muscle fibers. Again, we've got two classes. One of the classes has two subclasses. Type 1 are called slow twitch fibers. Slow twitch. Type 2A and type 2B are called fast twitch. Slow twitch, another name for them, are slow oxidative fibers. It takes them a while to generate their whole force. They've got a lot of mitochondria. They depend on cellular respiration, and they are resistant to fatigue. They are resistant to fatigue. So in other words, they can sustain contraction for a long period of time. Example of these would be the muscles we use to stand, maintain your posture, bear your weight. These are also called red fibers, because they contain a pigment called myoglobin. This is not hemoglobin, it is myoglobin, because it's found in the muscles. Very much like hemoglobin, myoglobin is red. It is red. The dark meat that you get in chicken, that is primarily slow twitch fibers. If I caused you to have a headache, Jasmine, isn't this chapter incredibly dull? I'm about to put myself to sleep. Don't feel bad. Those are the ones that take a while to get up to speed, resist fatigue, and give you sustained contraction. So next up, the type 2A. These are called fast oxidative fibers. Fast oxidative, or FO fibers. Less myoglobin, so they're not going to be as dark. Yes, you guessed it. This is the white meat in chicken. Thrills Josh to no end to know that when he eats a chicken breast, he's consuming fast oxidative fibers, right? I've made your day. As you might guess, these move fairly quickly. Speed and power, both. They're able to break down ATP more quickly. The hand, the eyes. Oh wait, never mind. Don't get that down. These are kind of a hybrid. The type 2Bs are called fast glycolytic. These are the fastest. Your hands, your eyes, they don't exhibit as much force. what they do is respond quickly. They fatigue easily, fewer mitochondria. And that's it for section 9.4. So section 9.5, smooth muscle. You're basically going to have two different types here. Smooth muscle can be classified as multi-unit or visceral. Multi-unit or visceral. The visceral is sometimes called single unit. Multi-unit smooth muscle is not well organized. Basically, the individual cells function as individual units. They function as individual units. They exhibit a low amount of force and they respond individually. Typical places you'll find these: the walls of larger blood vessels, the iris of the eye, and they're typically stimulated by either neurons or hormones. Either neurons or hormones. Y'all know I have high blood pressure, right? I think I've shared that with you. Hypertension. So one of the drugs that I take is called a beta blocker. A beta blocker. Y'all ever heard of those? It's a fairly widely prescribed medication for high blood pressure. And what they do is they bind to beta receptors in the blood vessels, beta receptors. Those beta receptors are hormone receptors that basically take up adrenaline or noradrenaline. So instead of allowing the hormone to tell it to constrict, which ups your blood pressure, the beta blockers prohibit those hormones from binding, so it causes it to stay in a relaxed state. Does everybody see that? And what that's working on is the multi-unit smooth muscle. Visceral smooth muscle works as a single unit. It works as a single unit. You're going to have these working as sheets of muscle, thin sheets. When one is stimulated, all are stimulated. And this gives them a characteristic we call rhythmicity, which is a pattern of spontaneous repeated contractions. Spontaneous repeated contractions. And what that essentially does is it allows these muscles to contract in the pattern of a wave. Anybody here ever been in a stadium and they do the wave? Stand up, throw up your hands, and then you sit down and it goes around the stadium. Visceral smooth muscle essentially does the same thing. So if we have a tube that is coated by visceral smooth muscle, you're going to get a contraction start here. Is everybody looking up here to see this? And it's going to travel the length of the tube as a wave. Does everybody see that? And what it's going to do is it's going to gradually move anything in that tube along with that rhythmic motion. We call that peristalsis. Peristalsis. This is what moves food through the digestive system. So obviously you're going to find visceral smooth muscle in the stomach, the intestines. You'll also find it in the urinary bladder. The urinary bladder. That's just what makes you pee. It also lines the uterus. When a woman gives birth, they talk about her contractions. Well, it's not voluntary muscle trying to push that baby out, it's smooth muscle. Learned something today, didn't you guys? You look embarrassed by that. Good. So does everybody understand this? The digestive system is easily the most obvious example, but I want you to be aware it's not the only example. Smooth muscle contraction. Well, it also involves acetylcholine. However, as I mentioned, norepinephrine, a form of adrenaline, that is another neurotransmitter, and yes, you do need to know it, so yes, you want to get that down. That's another neurotransmitter that can stimulate contraction of smooth muscles. The main difference, instead of troponin, smooth muscle has a different protein called calmodulin. Calmodulin. This binds up the calcium ions once they're released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And that allows the contraction. Calmodulin. So basically, you think of troponin in the skeletal muscle, replace it with calmodulin in the smooth muscle, and you get the idea. Another difference, instead of getting most of the calcium ions from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it will get a lot of them from actually outside the cell, from the extracellular space. A lot of these neurons are under hormonal control. Hormones, chemicals secreted from glands in the body that cause a response, a sustained response. Let's get that down. A sustained response in a different location in the body. Would y'all like a real life example? Are you awake? Okay, great example. I was driving along, minding my own business on the way up here this morning. Some guy in a beat up old Chevy that didn't have working taillights just pulled right out in front of me. And my adrenal glands, which sit on top of my kidneys, released a large amount of adrenaline into my bloodstream. That had an immediate response of me yelling something that I can't repeat in front of my class, putting my foot onto the left pedal, not the right pedal, and looking for a way around this bozo and thanking God that there was a passing lane that was open. Does everybody see how that worked? Yes, that happened. Drive up this here, I swear, that's more dangerous than anything else I've done. Any questions? Okay. Another example, oxytocin. Oxytocin. This is released during childbirth. Stimulates contraction of the smooth muscle lining the uterus. It's produced in the hypothalamus. That's in the brain. The same hormone helps stimulate lactation. See what I mean when I say sustained? That's the key with a hormone. It differs from a nervous control because nerves respond almost immediately and they almost immediately reset, right? If you want a sustained reaction or a sustained stimulation, you need a hormone. So yes, you do need to write that down. Main thing about smooth muscle, and yes, you need to get this down, it contracts longer than skeletal muscle. It's slower to contract, but it's also slower to relax. Cardiac muscle, only found in the heart, striated cells, and rather than just looking at a two-dimensional network like we saw in the skeletal muscle, these will actually form a three-dimensional network, You're going to have a single nucleus rather than multinucleate, so yes, you need to get that down. You're going to have actin and myosin filaments, just like you saw in the skeletal muscle. The sarcoplasmic reticulum is less developed and stores less calcium. It is less developed and it stores less calcium. However, the transverse tubules are bigger, so they can release more calcium in response to a single stimulus. And these transverse tubules come from outside the cell. They carry calcium from the extracellular fluid. The opposing ends of cardiac muscle are connected by something we call intercalated discs. And this helps transfer the force of the contraction from cell to cell. Essentially, this allows one end of the muscle network to be stimulated. You transmit the impulse through that muscle network, and the whole structure contracts as a unit. We call this unit a syncytium. And it means the whole thing is either all or none. All of them work together or none of them work at all. When you consider the nature of a heartbeat, it makes sense. Cardiac muscle is self-exciting. It is also rhythmic in the same way we saw with smooth muscle. So you have a pattern of stimulation, contraction, relaxation. Stimulation, contraction, relaxation. And you just keep doing that over and over and over. Typical average heartbeat is about 70 beats per minute. It varies considerably with age, gender, weight, and overall fitness. take a look at table 9.3 on page 120, 319 in the hard copy, and you will see summarized the three types of muscle tissues. Know that table. You don't have to worry about the dimensions. I want you to know locations, major functions, striations and nucleus, special features, mode of control, and contraction characteristics. So basically everything except the first category. So everybody see that? You may want to know that by next Tuesday. What is the primary muscle action? The answer is movement. Now notice I did not say the primary muscle function. The function is to generate force. The main action is to use that force for movement. We normally think of that as moving a part of the body or the body as a whole. This requires the muscles to work together. Each muscle is going to have two ends. One of these is going to be more movable than the other. One of them is going to be less movable. The more movable end is called the insertion. The less mobile end is called the origin. If you take a look at figure 9.22, you'll see what I'm talking about. You're looking at the biceps, and you'll see that the origin of it is in the shoulder. The insertion of it connects to the radius. Everybody see that? You need to know those terms. Those might be good vocab terms on the next exam. Next up, you'll see the terms agonist and antagonist. An agonist causes an action. An antagonist works against that action. The biceps is the agonist for flexion, and the triceps is the antagonist. So if I'm flexing, this one is the agonist. The triceps under here is the antagonist. Does everybody see that? And most of our muscles work this way because we're not just using a single muscle to move that arm, are we? We're using a pair of them, the biceps and the triceps. Sometimes you'll have synergists. Yes, you need to know that term. The synergists contribute to the action. They help. This is a case where you have more than one muscle involved. Any questions? All right, take a look on page 122, figure 9.23 and 9.24. Everybody see them? Guess what we're doing in lab? Yep, you're going to need to know those two figures. Plus, go down towards figure 9.25. Everybody see those? When we get into lab, you're going to find that these particular diagrams, those three, will help you with most of the muscles that you're going to need to learn. We're going to have probably a couple of weeks on this, and I'm going to give you two options. You get to choose. How many of you want to have an all or nothing exam for all of the muscles of the body at the end of the 2-week period?
What's the other option?
Break it up to where we essentially have a lab quiz every day over the next 3 or 4 lab periods, but we only go with, say, the muscles of the arm, the muscles of the chest, the muscles of the face,
Break
the muscles
it
of,
Break it up for sure.
How many vote for break it up? Okay, that's what we'll do. So last thing I want to talk about are a couple of disorders of the muscles. Anybody in here ever heard of myasthenia gravis? Myasthenia gravis is an autoimmune disorder. The immune system attacks the neuromuscular junction. The immune system attacks the neuromuscular junction. And what this does is it means that the neurons have difficulty stimulating the muscles. You may want to write this down instead of just sitting back there texting your buddy. You're going to get drooping eyelids. You're going to get double vision, muscle weakness, and eventually you can end up losing more or less all of your muscle control.
What's it called? What's this one?
Myasthenia gravis.
Can you spell that?
MYASTHENIA Myasthenia gravis. There is another group called muscular dystrophy. Muscular dystrophy. These are typically caused by inherited problems with muscle protein. Muscle protein. Most often, the protein involved is dystrophin. 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 Dystrophin connects the cytoskeleton to the ECM. Connects the cytoskeleton to the ECM. If you've got a mutation in that gene, you inherit a defective allele. Essentially, your cytoskeleton of your muscles is not going to hook up to the ECM, so you're not going to be able to exert force through your muscles. These will eventually lead to muscle degeneration. You'll finally get to a point where you cannot function, you literally can't breathe. And these people typically don't have a very high life expectancy. Is everybody clear on that? Another one is red ragged muscle fibers. Red ragged muscle fibers. And this one is actually caused by a mutation in the mitochondrial DNA. The mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondria have their own genome. Mitochondria have their own genome. It is completely independent of the nuclear genome. It is only maternally inherited. It is only maternally inherited. That means you get it from your mother. The father has no contribution to the mtDNA. The reason for that is because all of the organelles come from the egg. All of the organelles come from the egg. The sperm, only thing it is a motor with an information packet. Once it delivers the information packet, the father's job is done, right? As my old genetics professor used to say, sperm are cheap, eggs are expensive. If you inherit the mutated form of the mitochondrial DNA, your mitochondria will form abnormally and not supply sufficient energy. They will not supply sufficient energy. Yes, you do need to get this down.
If you get the mutated, can you repeat that, please?
Huh?
Can you repeat that sentence?
If you get the mutated form, your mitochondria are abnormal. They do not generate as much ATP. It causes the cells of the muscles to malform. They're misshapen. That's where the red ragged fiber comes from. And finally, rhabdomyolysis. 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 Rhabdomyolysis is when damaged muscle breaks down, releasing myoglobin into the bloodstream. This is not a disease. This is an injury. It's characterized by very dark colored urine. If you exercise excessively, you can actually cause this, excessive exercise. Swelling, weak muscles, soreness, and then that reddish brown dark urine. How many of y'all would like some extra lab time? If not, I can continue lecturing. Extra lab time, raise your hand. Okay, so let's meet at 10 till and we will convene in the lab.